So thank you so much to everyone that is in the meeting and to everyone who's joining. If you're still thinking of a few people that could really grow from this conversation and enjoy it, please make sure that you send them the link, and you also let them know that this conversation is live on UJ Library's Facebook platform. So a link will go up into the chat room for that link. Please do share it on your social media, on your WhatsApp, and do let people who are unable to make it onto this Zoom meeting know that they can watch the conversation as it's happening right now on UJ Library's Facebook page. Before we get into today's conversation, just a few ground rules for this meeting. The first being that you will see that you're unable to switch on your mic or your video for this conversation, and that will stay that way till the end, but you are able to use the chat to post any comments that you have, any questions that you have during the conversation, and some of those will be asked to our guest Zulaikha at the end of the conversation. So I would really encourage you to ask away, to share your comments, and of course to also share your name. Although I think I should be able to see that if I do go on the chat at some point. But yeah, that's it for ground rules. Thank you so much for joining us for another Tshimong Talks webinar on UJ Library's platform. This is an initiative that we've undertaken to create an interactive platform where people can interact with a public figure in a range of sectors, working on issues that are important to our communities, to our country, to our continent, and to unpack not only the story of the person in question speaking, but to also talk about who they are in context of a particular topic. And today's topic is titled Choose to Challenge, which I think is self-explanatory, but it's also so powerful in that it's a call to action for today's young people to use activism as a tool to change society. And for us at Tshimong, we thought there's no better person to get into this topic with than Zulaikha Patel, who is a towering and impactful figure in contemporary activism in our country. Just to go into Zulaikha's bio, I mean, there's so much to say. So I really am picking the highlights here and leaving out some of the parts that I think we are going to benefit from hearing directly from Zulaikha herself. She's the youngest South African woman recognized on BBC's 100 Most Influential Women in the World. And she was recognized at the age of 13. She's also the youngest woman to receive a Mbowoto Award in the category Women in Media in 2016 under Carol Bauer Productions, which recognizes women who have shown outstanding leadership and fostered growth. She's also worked very closely with the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation since 2017, with the main objective of that being to rally the youth, to educate the youth on racism, and to encourage them to combat racism and serve as patrons during the Human Rights Campaign Month and the Anti-Racism Week in 2018 and 2019. There's so much to the story beneath the eye, and certainly a lot of it comes from her personal background with how she was raised by her family. With that being said, I am going to now welcome Zulaikha and also just ask her to switch your camera on so everyone can get to see her. So Zulaikha, hi, how are you doing?
Hi, Pussy, how are you?
I am good. So excited to finally be doing this call with you. I spoke to you a few days ago. I know a lot about your story, but also just hearing it from you was so refreshing. And I honestly believe that it's a story people need to hear. It's not just a story that young people might resonate with, but it's such a South African story. So who is Zulaikha? How did you come to be an activist and someone that is known in society as a towering figure for challenging power?
You know, Zulaikha Patel is simply someone that does not like rules, especially when rules are enforced enforced harshly, and those rules are not in line with the Constitution, and rules ought to be questioned all the time when rules challenge the basis of human rights. And that's simply who I am. I'm simply just someone who always seeks to question, power, question authority, and seeks for change. And I believe that I was that person before I even turned 13. I believe that I was that person ever since my childhood. And so growing up, I grew up in an interracial and interfaith background, my father being an immigrant from India and my mother being an African woman, an African Ndebele woman from Mpumalanga, and my father being Muslim as well, and then my mother being Christian as well. And so growing up in my very early childhood, I believe that because of the dynamics of our country, I was born when our democracy was only about 8 years old, which was 2002. And so racism had not been buried by that time. Until this day, it's still not buried. It wasn't buried in 1994. And so I grew up with the understanding of what racism was, because I could understand that I was being treated in a certain way because of who I am and what I represent, and because of the color of my skin, and because of the texture of my hair, and because of many other features. I already in my toddler years, I understood what being treated unequally was. And from the time I could speak and I was able to understand certain things, my parents had already sensitized me to the fact that prior to the world that we live in now, the regime that previously ruled our country, there was an act called the Immorality Act, which banned a marriage like theirs. And so as a child, I already understood the racial dynamics in our country, and also my positioning in that dynamic. And so growing up, because I'd already been sensitized to that, in all my experiences of racism and racial prejudice, like for example, whenever I was with my father, it was always in question whether or not he is my biological father, or I'd experienced prejudice because I'm a couple of shades darker than he is. My hair is curly and coily, unlike his, which is straight, and some of my features, like my nose, for example, doesn't look like his. And so I'd experienced prejudice whenever I was with him, or whenever I was with my mother. It was always in question as to, why would you go that route? I remember she would always be questioned, why would you go and marry a foreigner? Why would you marry a foreigner? And so I already understood that had a root, and that was not out of the blue. And I understood and knew what that root was. And I kept seeing different facets of that root in different spaces that I existed in. And that root being the apartheid regime, which is still very attached to our country and which hasn't been abolished at all. I would simply term my childhood, up until now, I would simply say that I've been walking through what is a new privatized and institutionalized form of apartheid. And because I saw that through education in schools, from primary school, I went to former whites only schools. My first primary school, I remember the first day I arrived, because I was already able to read and write when I arrived, because I started reading at the age of 4. And so when I arrived when I was 6, I was already able to read and write. I remember my white teacher saying to me, it's not normal that people who look like me appear to be this smart. It's not normal. It's the first time she encounters someone who she can actually say is smart and looks like me. And when she simply said looks like me, I already understood that she was treating me unfairly on the basis of race. And so growing up, because of all these experiences that I had, I always just had this fire that would not stop burning at all, where I always knew I wanted to not just be part of seeking change, but be part of propelling our country in the direction of change. And I believe that that was the fire that gave life and gave birth to my activism and shaped the person that I am today, and will continue to shape the person that I'm going to continue to prosper into. And from the time I was young, I remember whenever they would ask Zulaikha, what do you want to become when you grow up? It was always anything and everything that was in line with service and that was in line with bringing about change. And I remember saying when I was 8 that I would like to be a lawyer. And I remember I was asked at home, why do you want to become a lawyer? And I remember saying, I want to become like Advocate George Bezos. And I remember that from the time I was 8, every single year in school, in primary school, there was always one answer I always had, and that was the answer. And that is what gave life to my activism, and what continues to fuel it as well, because because of the experiences that I have, and because of the injustices that I've had to be subjected to and I've had to experience, I now have it in me that I cannot allow for someone that would come after me to have those very same experiences as me. I can't allow the generation that is going to walk South Africa and walk Africa and the world at large after me to have the exact same experiences as me, and to sit and have and engage in the very same conversations that I'm engaging in. It cannot be that the world I live in today is going to be the world that the generation after me lives in as well. And so that is what continues to fuel my activism, and that is simply who I am. And just to also just add on a very personal thing. And so when I was named, I was named upon a full moon, because my dad had the belief that when someone is named upon a full moon, they'll live up to their name, and their name will become their prophecy. And I was told by my father that Zulaikha means brilliant beauty. And when I asked why he named me that, he said that he named me that because what he wanted for me is that I would essentially be one who would be beautiful but do brilliant things in the world. Wow. And I think that
you have lived up to it.
Also been very tied to my personal journey as well.
Yeah, you've certainly lived up to it. You have a beautiful story. And it almost feels like you were born for, the things that you've taken on. But I mean, taking away all the romanticism of struggle and of public platform, when people can celebrate you retrospectively, in 2013, at a very young age, you rise up and you become this symbol for the fight against Pretoria Girls High School's hair policy. And that's where many people today might know you from, right? But what inspires you in that moment to call out the school's policy, even though other people, including Black people, seemingly did not see an issue with the policy and were not prepared to confront the issue?
Growing up in a political household definitely contributed to why I saw it necessary to challenge the bizarre racist policies. I grew up in a political household whereby, because of my father's role in the liberation struggle, he was active in the 80s, very active in 1986, and was on a wanted list in 1987. I grew up already socially aware of the conditions of our country. I remember being taught about finances and that was how my father also taught me about socialism. I vividly remember him saying to me, Zulaikha, you can't have all the capital to yourself. And I remember asking why. And he said, because you don't live alone on the world, and because that is what creates inequality, and that is what creates poverty, and that's why you can't have the capital to yourself, and the capital ought to be shared amongst all those you live with. And I remember that being my first definition of socialism, right? And so when I got to primary school and I already had experiences of racism, which in grade four, I unfortunately, like I think everyone, we all do fall into the trap of assimilating to whiteness, where in grade 4 till grade 5 and early grade 6, I relaxed my hair because I felt that I would be seen as important, and I would be seen as valid, because as much as I was one of the kids that were nerds in the class, the bookworm, someone who always got things right, I was never seen in that light because of the texture of my hair. And there was always remarks by all my educators, whereby I remember one in grade 4 saying to me, Zulaikha, you are quite smart, but it's just that you can never be seen for that because of the kind of hair you have and because of who you are. People like you are not meant to be seen in that light. And I remember that was the reason why I wanted to relax my hair. And so just as I was about to enter my adolescent years, I realized something that wasn't me. That was an altered version of me. And that was not who I wanted to be and who I wanted to showcase myself as. And I remember saying that if I truly want to be who I'm meant to be, I ought to be how I am meant to be and show it fully, And so I remember going natural, cutting my hair. And at that time, I'd stopped reading children's books as well, primarily because there was no representation in children's books. And so I had no interest in reading about blonde, blue-eyed characters that went to Big Ben in London. And I remember at the time, I stumbled across Steve Biko's I Write What I Like. I stumbled across my dad's copy at home, and I read in a random chapter. In a random chapter, I opened up to the chapter about us as Black people and what Black consciousness means to us. And I remember being so moved by it that I was like, no, there's no ways I'm ever going to touch a relaxer again, because that isn't who I am. And I think that's when I started to take in all these teachings I had in my childhood and fully immerse myself in them. And I would say that's when my political consciousness began. And so when I got to Pretoria Girls High, I got there, I would say I was kind of a woke kid, and I was someone whereby I had an identity already as someone who questioned things. I had the identity of someone whereby people knew me as, you definitely don't want to say the wrong thing around her. She's definitely gonna question and ask you questions. And so I remember experiencing my first experience of racism in the school, whereby I was walking with a friend and we were speaking to each other in isiZulu, and we were conversing amongst ourselves, and we were walking together, and we were actually in a line in one of the corridors, and there was 4 of us. And whilst we were speaking, we were laughing, and a white educator stormed out of her office, and then she came and grabbed me by the wrist, and she scolded me, and she's like, you don't speak that kind of language and make those funny noises in these corridors. You are here and you are privileged to be in such corridors, and you do not behave like a hooligan in these corridors, and you will speak in English or Afrikaans. You will not speak that language. And I remember asking her, and I said to her, but that language is part of our 11 official languages, and I can speak any of those 11 official languages when I want to. And I remember her simply saying she doesn't have time for loud blacks, and she went back into her office. And from that moment, how I was seen and perceived in school completely also changed. I was always almost seen in a delinquent light as well. And I remember that angering me as well. And I remember I got to a point whereby as I was having more and more experiences, and they were just getting more and more bizarre, going from either language or either going from the fact that as underage Black girls in a schooling environment, we were rendered to criminality and we were criminalized, and we were told we could not be together in groups of more than 4 because that is us looking suspicious and we might be conspiring. And I remember telling my dad about the term conspiring. And I remember he said to me, in a democratic country, no one is going to use that term with you. And as these experiences got more and more, got to a point whereby in June, we were actually threatened. And I was threatened where I was told that I was not going to write June exams if I didn't do anything about my hair. And it wasn't just only the hair policy, there was a language policy, and there were also just those individual personal encounters of racism with educators one-on-one. And I remember the hair policy standing out for me, whereby because I knew that under the apartheid regime, there was the pencil test being the determining factor of how you would live, what your standard of living would be in the country because of the texture of your hair. If the pencil slipped out of your hair, the better. And I determined how people would live in the country and how people would be treated. The hair policy stood out for me because the more Eurocentric your hair was, the straighter it was, the better your education was, and the better experience you got, and the more coiled and the more curly your hair was. Education. And I remember understanding that if there was hindrance in someone's education, then that is a violation of a constitutional right, because we are all entitled to our constitutional rights. And in the Constitution, it's that we all have the right to the access to access a quality education. And I remember the hair policy standing out for me because it stated that afros and dreadlocks were not permitted. And I remember understanding that as, because we're Black, that means there's going to be a hindrance in the kind of education and I remember also linking it to the very same pencil test and the fact that the less resources you got because of the texture of your hair. And I remember also seeing it as, because we are Black, we are expected to leave our Blackness at the gate and assimilate to whiteness upon entrance into institutions that our forefathers had built for free. Even though we were never allowed to attend these institutions, but these institutions were built by us. And so I remember all these things going through my mind, and then only for me to actually have an experience of actually mind and remain questions and with my father. And so I had 2 experiences whereby the first experience I would term the modern day pencil test under the democratic South Africa, because I was in a PE class, and in the PE that we were then told that we need to do something about our hair and we would not be allowed to continue to attend PE.
Yeah.
And then my second experience being literally the pencil test itself, whereby I was called into very to you in, it would, and you would be spoken to as if you're a delinquent. You'd be spoken to as if you've done something wrong, and you would be spoken to in a tone whereby you need to think you've done something wrong. And in the seating position, they would sit around you, and you would sit in the center as if you were being questioned. And I remember sitting in the center, and I asked them why I was here, and they said to me that my hair is exotic, a term that I keep sense to them. It doesn't make sense to them that I look like this, yet my surname is Patel. And it doesn't make sense to them that my name and my surname are put together, Zulaikha and Patel. And couple of days. And so then they proceeded to tell me that, and often I'm seen being picked up by an Indian man. And then I went in to correct them, and I said to them, that man is my biological father. That man then they just didn't believe me. And she proceeded to open up her cupboard, and she said that they have a lot of questions about my identity.
Oh my goodness.
And they then said to me that to them, they just want to understand, and they even went to me. And I remember my hair was being put the pencil in my hair right here. I was just so hurt that I've been fed so much about being told that I'm born free and I ought to embrace freedom and I ought to embrace democracy. Yet at that time, I was like, for 13 years of my life, I've been experiencing racism to a point whereby my parents have to sensitize me to the fact that an immorality here under a democratic republic, and I have a pencil stuck under my hair and I am referred to with the K word. And I was so angered. And I remember I went home that day and I didn't come back to school for a couple of days because I was so traumatized. And I remember when I came back, I just came back earned my place here. I passed to be here, and I'm going to cement myself here, and I'm going to ensure that I am treated equally, and I'm treated equally like the human being I am, and I'm not going to be treated unequally. And I remember saying to myself that in anything and everything, I'm going to do this not for myself, but for another Black about all of this. And I remember there came a turning point whereby we were in a bathroom one time, and it was just about like 6 of us, and we're like, we can't continue to live like this, because these conditions are becoming unbreathable. We can't breathe anymore, because every day we come here not just to learn, we to fight for ourselves. We come here to fight to survive in this institution. We come here to remember that's when we planned a silent protest for the 26th of August 2016, where we came dressed in all black, and the all black